Today, the update is joined by Global Ambassador for the WWF-Australia, founder of 25-0, polar explorer, author, filmmaker and environmental scientist. Tim Jarvis, thank you for being here today. Could you start off by telling us a bit about yourself and what you've been involved in?
Good to be here. I'm here in Geneva to talk with the school and also with the Swiss-British Chamber of Commerce about environmentalism and leadership. I'm a scientist by training. I grew up in Malaysia and Singapore as a kid. I didn't see snow till I was 19, and now I spend a lot of my time in the polar regions, both on adventures but also doing environmental science. And I use my trips and my books and my films to try and communicate positive environmental messages about the state of the planet.
Could you briefly explain what 25-0 is and your involvement with the project?
Yeah, 25-0 is my latest project. It was my idea, I guess, to climb those mountains at the equator that still have a glacier. It's great spending time in the Arctic and the Antarctic, but those places are very remote and the scale of them is very, very large. So you need something a little bit easier to show climate change, and I'm using the glaciers at the equator to do that. Everything else around the glaciers is either green or brown, and the only ice around is in the glaciers in the valleys at the equator. So I'm using their melting to show how much climate change is happening and then getting people to do more about trying to counter climate change.
What drove you to retrace Shackleton's journey in 2013, and did this in any way inspire you in the founding of 25-0?
Yeah, the Shackleton journey was a very challenging expedition. For those who don't know, Shackleton was a heroic era polar explorer around about 100 years ago, and he did an expedition where he escaped from the Antarctic after his ship was sunk, and it was an amazing journey. It's the biggest polar expedition that there's ever been. I was asked by his granddaughter if I'd lead a team to make this a reality, and I began a 4-year process of doing it. The short answer is I've always wanted to do that particular thing. It was a huge, huge expedition, and she asked me to do it, and I felt very honoured to have been asked to do it. When we got to the island of South Georgia at the end of that expedition, South Georgia was an island covered in glaciers. And when we got there, we found it was completely different to what Shackleton had experienced 100 years before. And if we could climb across the mountains and show the amount of change that had happened between his expedition and ours 100 years on, we could really communicate the climate change message. And that provided the original idea for 25-0.
Was there a specific moment that sparked your interest for our climate?
A specific moment, well, I think growing up, I grew up spending a lot of time in the outdoors, and that began my love of nature, and that led to my career as an environmental scientist. And now things have gone full circle, where I realise the adventures I go on give me an opportunity to communicate an environmental message. So I started off loving the outdoors, that led to environmentalism, but my expeditions actually give me an opportunity to communicate the environmental message more effectively through books and films and talks and images and stories to people. So that's what I do.
You've been in some very physically and mentally challenging situations. How do you remain focused and positive, and do you use those same techniques when addressing our global problems in order to keep in sight of the bigger picture?
Yes, it's a very good question. I mean, I do. The same skills required to deliver a very difficult polar expedition are the same skills required to deliver a better planet, really. You have to have the vision, you have to have determination to make it happen, you have to gather the right people around you, you have to keep those people motivated, you have to overcome problems along the way, you have to remain focused on the big picture, but you have to break the enormity of that big picture down into small pieces and work towards small milestones, or you drive yourself a bit crazy. So the same skills for delivering a big polar expedition are the same for delivering a better world for us all. So I try and use the same skill set.
As a 17-year-old living in Switzerland in 2016, I'm surprised that large sectors of the world's population still remain skeptical that humans are responsible for climate change. Despite all the evidence, why do you think there's so many skeptics?
There's a big question, because there's so much vested interest in people not believing. So the powers that be, there are a lot of organisations in whose interest it is to keep people guessing about whether or not it's real. The process of changing from where we currently are to where we need to be is a very costly one, and certain organisations will have to bear a lot of the brunt of those costs if we change. And so they spend a lot of time perhaps giving the impression that it's not real so that they don't have to change from where they currently are to where we need to be. The other thing is that people are very evidence-based. Humans need to see the change. And so it's no point talking about higher carbon levels in the atmosphere. If you want to change behaviour, you have to find something closer to home that someone can see changing before they believe that the issue is real. So here in Switzerland, for example, it might be the glaciers close to Geneva. If people see that they are no longer where they used to be, and you can link that with climate change as the cause, then that's a very effective way to try and make people want to believe.
Do you have any plans for future projects?
Yeah, I've got lots and lots of projects, more projects than I have time. So I'm going to Greenland to climb mountains in Greenland. Greenland is an amazing place with a lot of unclimbed mountains, and the ice caps there are under threat through climate change. So again, we can go on an adventure, but we can also communicate an environmental message. We can also use the project to raise funds for climate change projects that are actually doing something about the issue, and that's the model I follow with all the trips I do. I don't get paid to do the expeditions I do. I raise the money. I use it to help corporate organisations get a bit of profile, and that's fine as long as they're good ones. And then I use the expeditions to fundraise for good causes. But plenty of projects.
Global warming is arguably the most pressing issue in the world right now. Do you have any hope that there will be a meaningful change before it gets too late?
That's another very big question. I mean, I have hope, but we are in serious trouble. I mean, we really are in serious trouble. We've had 21 meetings of the global community via the UN to get to the point we're currently at, which is last year in Paris, where everybody agreed there needed to be a new climate agreement, international climate agreement, that comes into effect in 2020. So when the Kyoto agreement runs out in 2020, last year's Paris climate talks were all about saying, what do we replace that with? We have a new agreement. The new agreement obligates everybody, which is good news, but the commitments everybody's made under that new agreement don't actually get us to 2 degrees Celsius of change, which is the dangerous level we don't want to go beyond. So it's good that we have an agreement that obligates everyone. Is everyone doing enough? No, they're not. And we need to make sure that we ramp up countries' commitments over time. Otherwise, we're really in very serious trouble.
What do you think countries, businesses, and everyday people need to do to make this change a reality?
Well, that's another very, very good question. I mean, I think we are the ones who will have to make the change. We can't just rely on governments to reach an international agreement via the UN process and then expect the problem to go away. It's whether we drive to school or walk to school, whether we have solar PV panels on our roof, what we buy. Our purchasing decisions are the things that drive business. If business thinks we want to buy things which result in destruction of the planet, then they're going to continue to produce those things because we're buying them. So we have to, it's really ultimately down to us to make the decisions. When I say us, I mean people at school, I mean people in business, people in everyday life, not just waiting for an international United Nations-based process to come up with the answers and solve the problem so that we don't have to do anything. It'll come down to us.
Tim Jarvis, thank you for your time.
Thank you.